Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's live at 5, and this is Senior Moments, and I'm Tommy Ellison, and I'm tickled to be here with you this afternoon. And been thinking about this episode a lot. In fact, this whole episode that I'm doing tonight is kind of based on me going to a football game Friday night. My grandson plays for Homewood, and so it was a home game in Homewood. And Friday night, they actually honored the teammates from about 30 years ago. I don't remember the exact number, who were state champions there at Homewood and took home the trophy for football state championship that year. And one of the coaches there, who was actually head coach and athletic director at the time, was a former teammate of mine at Samford University. His name was Bob Newton. We always called him Fig in college. I don't know if that stuck through his coaching days or not, but anyway, that's what we always called him. But Bob was also in the group being honored, and you know, it was a wonderful time for them, and I guess for all that remembered that. There were a lot of former players that were there, and a lot of former parents that remembered, I guess their grandparents now, like me, that remembered those days. And it kind of brought back a memory for me from 50 years ago that I thought I'd share with you tonight, just for fun, with this being Halloween week and all. And I thought it would probably be maybe an appropriate memory for something that happened a long time ago during this Halloween week, you know, where everyone's trying to scare everybody. I don't know about you, but I've got neighbors that actually decorate for Halloween probably in a bigger fashion than they do for Christmas. But it's always fun to see how their collections of yard scaries go and grows, I guess, over the years as we celebrate Halloween. But back in my college days at Samford, this is back in the early 70s, you know, we didn't wear leather helmets, but we weren't too far removed from that. We were, you know, playing ball there. And of course, many of the athletes that were on campus lived in one of two places. There was a place underneath our gym, the Cybert Gym it was called, and it was an old locker room that had been fixed up, and they had bunk beds in there, and there was a kind of a gang shower and a bathroom there as well, being a former locker room. And they had fixed it up for a lot of the athletes that perhaps didn't have full scholarships, but they called it the bog, which meant the bottom of the gym. And then there was another dorm on campus. It was known at the time as Crawford Johnson Hall, and that was the dorm that I and many other of the guys were staying in. And so we actually kind of housed ourselves in one of the wings of Crawford dorm, and it was interesting. But this particular episode is entitled "Fear Has a Snooze Button," and that'll all make perfect sense in a moment. But this is episode number 27, and this is kind of how the story goes. You know, I had in my possession back then, in my room, a really, really creepy mask, you know. And every year when the freshmen moved in, during our 2-a-day practices, and it was, I don't know, it wouldn't be considered hazing, but let's just say it was my own little way of personally, you know, getting to know them and well, just harassing them, I guess is the better word. But I had this wild looking mask. It wasn't like Wolfman, but it was more like a kind of a crazy, demented person with big teeth and wild hair. And what I would do, I would nobody locked their dorm rooms at night, so I would ease into the room. These are the freshmen, and they'd be laying there just sound asleep. And rather than just shake them and wake them up with that mask on, I would just lightly touch them on the shoulder. And when I did that, they would begin to wake up. And typically, if they were laying on their back, the first thing they would see as they kind of came into the real world from their sleep stage there was this mask and big old me standing over them. And that was kind of the way I initiated those freshmen. And of course, it always worked. I always got a giant scream out of them, and typically, running in place in their bed trying to get away. And anyway, it was all in fun, maybe for more so for me than them, but that was kind of the MO that I had when all the guys and players showed up. Well, this one particular night, I was walking down on the other end of the dorm where some of the upperclassmen were staying in their rooms, and this particular night I went into one of the seniors' dorm rooms, and it just happened to be Bob Newton, gentleman I mentioned a moment ago. And Bob had been there for years. He had been playing for a long time, and I guess he had pretty much seen it all. And when I tapped Bob on the shoulder, he was sleeping with his face and body facing the wall. And so I was coming up kind of behind him as he was laying there in the rack. And I kind of grabbed his shoulders and gave him a little shake. And he turned around and looked at me and said, "Get out of here, monster," and turned back around and went right back to sleep. Well, seems like the longer you play at Samford, the more conditioned you are to fear. And, maybe you just learned that sleep was more valuable than panic. I don't know. But anyway, I want to fast forward a few years because I found myself late one night coming into the little town down near Callaway Gardens. I had been in Atlanta working the previous couple of days, and I was supposed to meet my boss at the hotel or the motel there at Callaway Gardens. And if you've ever been to Callaway Gardens, it's a wonderful experience with the museum there and the Butterfly Museum, and they have a nice restaurant and they have nice rooms. Unfortunately, we were going there to work a trade show. It was an exhibition of our products in the sports floor business for a group of architects that were meeting there for their annual meeting, the AIA, the American Institute of Architects. But unfortunately for me, my boss, who had made the reservations for the hotel, was only able to get one room. And it was a giant queen-size bed, so we really weren't into that. So we decided that I would have to find a different room. And he actually, before I got there, found one for me. But it wasn't at the hotel. It was at a bed and breakfast there in Callaway Gardens. Well, I was late getting in, and I knocked on the door, and the lady that ran the bed and breakfast came to the back door there where I was standing with my suitcase and hoping that I was at the right address. And she said, "You must be Mr. Ellison." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am. And I hope you still have a room for me." And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're very big, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yes, ma'am, I am. I was always called a husky when I was in elementary school. But anyway, I'm probably 6'5", 6'6", weighed about 275, 285 at this point in my life. And there I was standing at her back door, and I'm wondering to myself, why is it you're even asking me or making that point? And she told me, she said, "Well, Unfortunately, we do have a room, but it's the children's room. And I said, well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. And she said, well, our home is decorated like a lot of the antebellum homes around here with, the master bedroom and guest bedrooms. And those are all unfortunately taken with other customers. And the only room that we had left was the children's room. And I'm assuming it was because of my late arrival. I don't know that for a fact. But, as I said, driving in from Atlanta, I was late getting there. And the bed and breakfast, it was kind of, had the creaky floors, the wooden floors, and had the floral wallpaper that kind of, smelled like your grandmother's perfume. But I did have a room. So I got the last available one, and wouldn't you know it, as she said, it was the children's room. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means there was little lace curtains hanging in the windows and pulled back, with little curtain ties, and there were shelves with toys and homemade dolls, old-fashioned dolls, like little Madame Alexander dolls that were on the shelves. And right there by the window, there was a dress form that was clothed with it had a long white sleeping gown. I would imagine it was antique. I'm not sure. I've never been into sleeping gowns, but the sleeping gown was hanging on this dress form. And some of you probably, may remember those old fashioned antique dress forms, and they were used to literally build a woman's dress there on the frame of it and make sure all the measurement. I think you get what I'm talking about, especially if you've been around a while. And so this long white sleeping gown was part of the room's decor, and that was really the only purpose for it. And if you've ever seen one of them, it's just the torso, kind of in a I would say an adult height, standing there. There's no head, there's no arms, which kind of made it a little creepy to begin with. You can think of some movies like Psycho and others where you might have seen those in the decor of those old antebellum houses that were being used. I guess they were really Victorian houses, but that's another story. So the bed was about, I don't know, 4 foot long, maybe 4.5 foot long. And so when I got into bed, it had a brass headboard, and it had a brass footboard, the old-fashioned brass tubing. And so the only way that I could find a comfortable way to stretch out to sleep was to sleep on a diagonal on this bed, which is what I did. But sometimes during the night, I had to get up and tend to, what men of my age tend to do. And as I was making my way towards the little restroom or the little bathroom area that was, tied into this children's room, I looked, and there, with the moonlight coming through the window where the dress form was standing, was when I saw it. The silhouette of that dress form in the silver moonlight coming through that window looked for all the world to me like a headless ghost. And I actually found a picture of one of those. That's kind of what it looked like right there. And as you can see, it was casting a very unusual silhouette. And of course, I'm half asleep, trying to make my way through a strange room, barefooted, looking for my way to the restroom, which I'd only seen hours earlier because of my late arrival. And there stood in the window was the headless ghost. That's what I thought. And I don't remember what octave I screamed in, but I'm pretty sure it was one not found on the hymn chart. I do remember it scared me so bad that I literally screamed like a girl. And it took me a minute to get my bearings and fully wake up and realize that it was that dress form and not, some type of antebellum Victorian ghost that had appeared in this room. And I didn't even believe in ghosts, but that there was the one I was looking at. And so, like I said, it was a crazy experience. And what happened the next morning, they're serving breakfast, family style for all the people who have rented rooms and staying there. And they were all sitting around the breakfast table when the dining room table there for breakfast when I came down to the room to have my breakfast. And I was the last one to sit down, and everyone is enjoying their bacon and eggs and homemade cat's head biscuits. It was a wonderful breakfast. But then one of the ladies there sitting at the table asked the question. She said, did anybody hear somebody scream last night? And I just bit my lip and smiled and said, no, not me. And I kept eating my crispy bacon and thinking to myself, wow, isn't this kind of like a payback for what I used to do to those poor freshman guys, I will say this, fear is a funny thing. And back then, I was the one giving it out 50 years earlier. But years later, I got a reminder of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of fear and trembling and screaming, I guess. So, is there a moral to this story? I don't know. I guess I could probably say that fear might visit, but it doesn't have to move in. You get used to things like that. I being a grown adult man, felt a little embarrassed that it scared me so bad, especially the scream. And I was even more embarrassed that someone else in the house had actually heard it during the night. Might have scared them, who knows? But, if fear does show up wearing a lace gown in the moonlight, just roll over and say, get out of here, monster. That's the answer. That's the solution. Hey, listen, thanks for watching. This is Senior Moments. Today, it's really evidence of a misspent youth and maybe even a misspent adulthood. But I'm going to let you go now. I appreciate you watching. If you would, be sure and tell your friends about my podcast. I do this as a labor of love, sharing these stories, and I hope you're enjoying them. If you do, be sure and leave a comment. And got a couple of comments here. I see my sister from New Jersey is watching. She says, what a great idea to keep that in the children's room. I guess you're talking about the dress form or me screaming. I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Anna. But anyway, thanks for watching from up in West Orange, New Jersey. And there's my gal from Fairfield, Alabama, former classmate of mine, Donna Hardy Troncalli. Hey, Donna, it's good to see you. Glad you're watching today. And thanks for the shout out that you're giving me today. And if you would tell your folks and friends about the podcast, and hey, do this too. Be sure and listen to this guy that's coming up. He's a pretty smart guy, and he's got a couple of requests for you. And I hope to see you next week on Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you later. And if you're watching this on the replay, be sure and leave a comment as well there if you would. You guys have a great Sunday evening, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.